Clark was talking to us last night about the wonderful advantage of our disadvantages. And it's wonderful to have him talk that way, because there's so wonderfully much truth in it. That struck me in just a new way just the other day. I was down in Indianapolis, and I was talking to the camp group down there. And we were talking about koinonia there. I'm not going to talk about koinonia this morning except indirectly. Sometime before we're through here, I'm going to talk about koinonia, believe me, but not this morning. Say, incidentally, if there's anyone at any time that cannot hear my voice, will you raise your hand? Is there anyone here that cannot hear now? You cannot hear? Not very well. Thank you. I'll see what I can do about that. But it just suddenly swept over me that the communists are one of our greatest blessings today. Because remember where Jesus says, "Blessed are ye when men shall persecute you and revile you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad." Well, I don't know whether we should say the communists have been persecuting us, but certainly they've been reviling us, and they have been saying all manner of evil against us falsely, of course. Well, I'm afraid we've done our share, too, on that. But nevertheless, if we were to take Jesus' beatitude, we'd say, "Why, you blessed communists, you blessed communists, because here you're making us wake up. Here you're making us do what we should have been doing all the way through." And to go on with what Jesus said, "Rejoice and be exceeding glad. For great is your reward in heaven," or at least great is your reward if you do now, if you come through and deliver on what I've outlined for you. So it just struck me there was a new way in which these so-called disadvantages turn into the great blessings. So after this, I think it's going to be easier for me every time I encounter a communist or read what a communist says or anything like that to say, "Why, you blessed fellow, come here, I love you," see? And so forth. You know, Warren Austin had a workout that way in the United Nations. Frank Laubach used to love to tell about it because he was in there representing the United States, and these fellows would get up and pour forth their accusations and so forth for hour after hour, I guess. And he wasn't accustomed to taking it in that way. Warren Austin wasn't. But he realized that he had to. He had to shift gears inwardly. He had to do something that he hadn't done before. And so he shifted gears, and he began to pray, and he just had to pray and pray and pray. And then some of the other fellows got around and helped pray with him. Well, another one who had the same thing was this judge, Harold Medina. You see, in that trial, remember, they just heaped all these disturbances. Well, the communists are smart. They know where we're weak. And Glenn Clark was telling us last night, see, these weaknesses are your strength. They're your opportunity. They're the blessings God has given you. And they know where we're weak, and so they get up and call you a liar and tell you all this sort of thing, and we get all huffed and puffed and everything else, you see. And consequently, then the first thing you know, why we're right in their hands where they wanted us all the time. Well, Harold Medina realized that that couldn't be. And so he prayed earnestly every night and prepared himself for the day so that he would not be thrown off key. And so he carried that thing through in a wonderful way, a way that has won him the respect and admiration of all of our people. And so it goes. Well, the thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit this morning is just the fact that most of us have had tremendous difficulties in getting rid of these selves of ours. You see, it's not that we are all bad, and it's not that we're all good. We're this glorious mixture. I love the thing that Starr Daily said years ago, in which he said, you know, there are two kinds of people that are easy to live with: the saints and the sinners. Because the saints, you always know what they're going to do. No matter what you do, they bless you. And the sinners, likewise, you know what they're going to do. They're going to get you if they can, no matter what you do, you see. But he said, you folks in between, you're tough. You're hard to live with because you never know what you're going to do, see? 1 minute you're with you, blessing you. The next minute you're off there on the other side. And that is the whole trouble. That is the whole trouble. It isn't the sinners that are causing the difficulty in the world today. It certainly isn't the saints that are causing the difficulty. It's us in-betweeners. Because what would we think if in our world here, if the Lord said, well, let's see, today's a good day, all right, I'm going to turn on the power of gravity. And so I think that'll hold things together pretty well. But the next morning, well, I don't feel so hot. I think I'll turn off the power of gravity this morning and see what happens. See, well, it'd be sort of hard to figure things out, wouldn't it? If one day we had gravity and the next day we didn't. If one day I was thinking here this morning, or last night, when we were wondering where all the heat in the world had gone. Well, I think I know where it had gone. It's out in Kansas, and it's out in a few other places, because I've been in some of those hot places this summer. But the point was, when it was hot, we complained, and then when it gets a little bit cold, why, we tend to complain. And I had a good laugh at Paul this morning when he asked how many of us wanted ice, wanted to order ice, and so forth. Well, there we are. We've got to find what is true and abide by it. Now, of course, I think the way in which we begin to come at that here in the camps is when the Bible says, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Well, what is this Spirit? Not by might nor by power. How do we work at things? Well, unless I'm badly mistaken, we work at things most of the time by might or by power. If we can pull a lever here, why, we do it. I got to thinking, I don't know what made me think of this, but I got to thinking about criticism. And it suddenly dawned on me that criticism is in every instance, I believe, an effort to change things from the outside. You see, you try to control someone else's life by your criticism of them. You're trying to change it from the outside. Well, now, is that the way God works? Is that the way He does things in the world? No. He has provided another way. a wonderful way. Not by might, nor by power, nor by criticism, nor by many of these other things, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Well, now, the thing that Glenn Clark was talking about last night is how can we make room for the Spirit? And what is that Spirit? Because he was pointing out that these things that have defeated us, these things where we have been weak, are, of course, the areas where self is still, well, I was going to say where self still abides. That doesn't always follow, but it's where it makes difficulties for the self. And that is what gets us down. One of the greatest, I remember, at one of our meetings in Democracy in Action, this industrial group that I was working with, there we had a lot of men in industry, in management, all the way from foremen to presidents of companies and so forth and so on. And they were men who were, in the main, successful in the eyes of the world. And we brought there one time a fellow that was practically done for by multiple sclerosis. He just was practically helpless physically. But he had the most radiant spirit that you can imagine. And we got him up in a wheelchair. We had to go to special pains to get him over there to Green Lake. But we got him up there in this wheelchair in front of that gang of men, and he talked to them about the wonderful things that he had found. Now, what had he done? Well, when he'd been in the hospital, they had said to him, well, you're through. You've got 6 months to live. And he said, 6 months to live? Well, okay, then I'm going to live it the way I want, not the way you say. So he began to do everything that he could for everyone else. He, by sheer force of will, instead of staying in bed, he got himself out of bed. And he managed to get a wheelchair and a little portable typewriter. And he could still use, he couldn't hold a pen. His hands were too crippled for that. But he could still take a finger and punch out on a typewriter. And so he began in his wheelchair to go around to the beds of all these other people and say, wouldn't you like to write a letter? All right, tell me what you want to say. And he began to peck it out for these other people that were in the same situation as he. And he said, I've always wanted to be a man of letters, and here's my chance. So he went around. Well, then people, because of this wonderful spirit of his, they began to respond to him. And someone sent him a great big box of chocolates, Hershey chocolates or something like that. Well, what did he do? Why, he took it and he began to distribute these things all over the hospital. I doubt if he kept one of those things for himself. He just gave them away all over because he said, I believe that that's the only way I'm going to get my money's worth out of this last 6 months, see? And then another thing that he did was that it was wartime, and he got the munificent sum every month, an allowance of $8 a month, I think it was, for incidentals that he would need. And so with that $8 a month, he says, I'm going to buy a war bond. What did they cost? $25 war bond, $3.75 or something like that. What's that? 18. That doesn't add up, does it? Oh, 18. Well, but you could buy them on installments, couldn't you? He was buying his on installments, but he took this $3 or $4 out of his $8, and I think later on, yes, he bought 2 of them. That's right. I think it cost him between $6 and $7 a month out of his $8 a month. One of them he was buying for a nephew of his, see? So here he was, giving in this wonderful spirit. Well, what happened? Well, after a couple of years, the doctors called him in, and they gave him a, yes, he had 6 months. So after a couple of years, the doctors went over him very carefully. And they said, look it, you're a miracle. And he said, what do you mean? He said, of course I know I'm a miracle, but he said, what do you mean? What are you driving at? Because this fellow, he'd been a salesman before this thing caught up with him, and he'd also been a parachute jumper and a few things like that. And so he had this rough and ready way about him, hail fellow well met. But they said, I said, look at here. We've called you in especially for this checkup. Now, you'll never be any better, but so far as we can tell, there isn't one trace of the activity of this disease which, according to our medical records, no one has ever licked before. So you're a miracle. Well, what I started to tell you this for was because when he sat in front of this group of successful businessmen with this radiance of spirit in the face of his limitations, his all too obvious limitations, you see, they shook their heads and said, and I thought I had trouble. He just so shamed them by the attitude that they had taken, that it just was like a bath of refreshing, life-giving water over them all. And that is the evidence of the Spirit. Now, our job here in these next few days is to make way for that Spirit, to make room for it. Because the only way we'll ever find out what its power is and what its reality is to do that. Now, I like to say this in talking to any group of people. I don't think that there's anyone here that hasn't had experience with this Spirit at some time or other. It's perfectly amazing if you get people to sharing, to find out how often there are deep experiences within them that they're afraid to tell anyone else because they're afraid someone will think them peculiar if they do tell it. And so they keep them to themselves and think, well, I must be a peculiar duck. And this thing happened to me. I remember one time when Frank Laubach was, I think, here at Koronis. And he was talking one evening. And someone, after that session, said, noticed this person who seemed to be deeply disturbed. And so they said, what's the trouble? Well, finally he's told. And he said, the trouble is, he said, last night when Frank Laubach was talking, he said, I saw a figure there beside him. I think in this case it was supposed to be the figure of Stalin, standing beside Frank Laubach. And the person said, well, isn't that wonderful? Well, he says, the trouble is I don't believe in that sort of thing. So you see, lots of things can happen that upset us because we don't believe in them. And so we block off in these different ways. The Spirit, well, now we're here to make room for those things. And then we can, so it's a great experiment And most of us who have come, now I'm going to ask you to show your hands again, those who are here at a Camp Farthest Out for the first time. That's wonderful, just wonderful. But you see, with all of you folks, you're going to have more fun experimenting and finding out what goes. Now, I think back as to how I got started, because when I first met Glenn Clark, I thought I prayed, but all I did when I prayed was to hang on to the things that I wanted and the things that I had for all I was worth, and then try to wrestle with God. And it wasn't until I got next to Glenn Clark that I began to realize there was any different way of going about it. And so then, later on when the camps were started, why, I came up here at his invitation. And I don't know whether it was that first year or not, although we had a good load that first year. First of all, we met for 3 weeks, and he talked 2 or 3 times every day, I think, for the 3 weeks. And after about a week, he ran out of talks, see? And so then he really had to rely on the Lord, see? And then it got good, see? So we had a wonderful time there. But at any rate, at one time there, he was talking about how you do these things with joy. And he told about a golfer that had been a professional golfer that had been going along, and he wasn't so good. He was having an awful season, an awful bad run of playing. And finally he got so fed up and so disgusted with himself that he was just ready to break up his clubs and throw them away. But he only had one more tournament to play in, and so finally he said, well, okay, I'll go through with it, but I don't give a hang whether I win or lose or anything else. He just threw it all overboard. He just was going to go through the paces, that's all. Well, you all know what happened. Why, he went out and broke the course record and walked home with the bacon and just did better than he ever had in his life before. Why? Because he was just playing for the fun of it. For the fun of it. So Glenn Clark told us that story, and so I thought, well, by George, I got to try that. And so with these boats down here on the lake, now, if anyone had asked me, I would always have said, well, yes, I love to row. But actually, rowing made me awfully tired. And so I did enjoy it, but it also made me tired. And so I went down and jumped in the boat and pulled out those oars, and I began to row. But now I was laying emphasis on the fact that I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to do this for fun, you see. And I didn't realize it, but I was beginning to discover for myself a tremendously important thing about, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit. Because his spirit is one of joy, among other things, see. And so I'm going to enjoy this, and so I began to row. Well, what did I discover? I discovered that when I got back about 2/3 of the stroke, a strain began to appear right around my neck and shoulders. Well, now, before that, I'd keep on pulling, strain or no strain, see? Because I thought I had to be a good he-man, you know, and row with a good long stroke and so forth and so on. But now, since I was going to enjoy it, the minute that strain hit me, why, I quit rowing and started another stroke, see? And consequently, I rowed that day for a long time. And when I came in, I wasn't fatigued in any sense. And not only that, of course, I couldn't prove this, but I actually believe that I rowed faster. Certainly, I enjoyed it a whole lot more. Now, the reason I mention that, it's simple. I think I'm simple-minded, and maybe some of you are simple-minded too. But the reason is because there was one simple little thing by which I gauged whether I was in the Spirit or out of the Spirit. Well, now you say, does this mean then that the Spirit of the Lord is to help you to row more enjoyably? Sure, that isn't all, but that's one thing. And so if in anything that we do, we have that if we are not straining, because when we begin to strain, it means we're pulling against ourselves. And so, when you're going to do something for someone, why, do it with joy. And if you can't do it with joy, now do you say you just don't do it? Well, of course, that would be one alternative. But ask yourself this also, can you enjoy not doing it? Huh? Generally, you'll find that you can neither enjoy doing it nor enjoy not doing it. Well, then you are in a fix, aren't you? Then what do? Then you get right down on the inside because you've come up against that point in your pull where it begins to strain. And you've got to relax. And you've got to get easy. And you've got now to discover within you, what is it that blocks this Spirit in me? Why is it that I don't have this Spirit? Either doing it or not doing it. And then you're on the trail. I remember one morning I was driving out to an assignment in my job in industry. And in this program of ours, we were supposed to be enthusiastic. And you see, supposed to be enthusiastic. That's a good way to put it, isn't it? And so when I got out about halfway there, I had to drive about 40, 50 miles that morning to this plant. When I got about halfway there, suddenly it dawned on me, why, I'm not enthusiastic. I'm not going there with any joy, with any delight, and so forth. So I pulled off the side of the road, and I sat down, and I said, now why? Well, then I began gradually to trace the thing back. And I finally got back to where I discovered that the last time I'd been in that plant, some of the younger men had come to me with a special problem, and it was concerning the boss. They said, now we can't get to the boss about this, and we can't talk to him, but you can. So now, you tell the boss what's what, and you get him to do this thing for us, see, this thing that should be done. And so unconsciously, I had accepted the responsibility of that. Now, did I have any right to accept that responsibility? Could I guarantee to deliver the boss bag and baggage to their way of thinking? No, I could express it, that's true. But, you see, I had assumed sort of the responsibility for delivering him. All hog-tied and parceled and everything else, you see. And I had no right, and since I had accepted a false responsibility, one that I had no right to accept, why, there was also a sense of insecurity and fear that went along with it. And so when I got back to that point, I realized, well, my goodness, now why was there the fear? Well, because I feared that if I didn't deliver the boss, then all these young fellows were going to say, oh, this guy Harding, he's no good. See, he can't deliver. In other words, I was all wrapped up in concern over certain results. And so when I discovered what that was, I just had to toss it all out the window, and I had to say, all right, Lord, it's in your hands. The boss is in your hands, and so are these young fellows. And maybe they'll think that I'm a complete washout, but that's all right. That's your will. And as far as the boss is concerned, if he has some other way of doing things, okay, that's all right. And just tossed it completely out because I had no right to take any sense of responsibility there. Well, what happened? why the old enthusiasm just bounced back 100%, see? That load just disappeared, and here I was just catapulted right up to where God wanted me. Well, I had one of the most wonderful days at that plant that you can imagine. Why, all sorts of I still don't remember what the boss did or said or anything of the sort. But I had a wonderful day. The Spirit of the Lord was with me in every contact. See? Well, that's what we're here to discover. Now, maybe you didn't sleep well last night. Maybe it was noisy. Maybe you had to take a detour when you were getting to camp here, the way Esther and I did last night. Last afternoon. Maybe some other things happened. You know, Glenn Clark said when he started this here that the reason we were near Painesville was because practically everyone had to go through some pain in order to get here. Now, that wasn't the kind of pain he was talking about last night, but he said that to get here was sort of like an entrance examination, you see. And if you didn't have some of these difficulties to go through, why, you probably didn't belong here. And so, all right, you had these things. You couldn't sleep last night. All right, there's your first opportunity to clear something away and let the Spirit come in. Now, you say, what is this Spirit? Well, about the best way that we can identify this Spirit is by what Paul says to us. Because he says, the deeds of the flesh are quite obvious. And sometimes, you know, every once in a while, I've enjoyed reading this to a group of these in-betweeners. You know, not the saints nor the sinners, the in-betweeners. It's interesting because you read it and then we can catalog ourselves and say, now, what is the thing that is characteristic of me and of my group, my family, my church, my community, so forth? See where we stand. So he says, now the deeds of the flesh are quite obvious, such as sexual vice, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, magic, quarrels, dissension, jealousy, temper, rivalry, factions, party spirit, envy, murder, drinking bouts, revelry, and the like. Now, do we know anything about any of those things? Are any of those things characteristic of any of us? Well, if they are, then we haven't made room for the Spirit. All those things have got to be rid. I tell you beforehand, as I have told you already, that people who indulge in such practices will never inherit the realm of God. Will never inherit. Now, why inherit? Well, my goodness, because you don't take this thing by force, you see, not by might nor by power. You don't grab a hold of, I want the kingdom, folks. Come here, kingdom. I've seen a lot of people go after it that way, see, haven't you? But it doesn't come that way. You have to inherit it. It has to be given to you. And you'll never inherit the kingdom of God that way. But the harvest of the Spirit, now we can begin to identify it. Now we can begin to find out what it is, find out when we're in it, when it's in us, when things are going along all right, see? When we're arriving. The harvest of the Spirit is love. Now, do you see why I asked you to turn to your neighbor and Say silently. You better do that again right now. Go ahead. Say silently, I love you. Love, joy, peace, good temper, kindliness, generosity, fidelity. Now that word fidelity interests me because fidelity, that's where you don't turn on gravity one day and turn it off the next, see? That's faithfulness, steadfastness, see? Gentleness, self-control. Now, the funny thing is that on all these things, they're all involved. Now, I know some people who love some people. And you'd say, well, now they're in their spirit. But they ignore a lot of other people. In other words, they're picking and choosing without realizing it. Well, all right, they're in the spirit within a certain area. But it's an awfully narrow area. And there's something else there that's got to get. The only test on that business of love is like St. Francis of Assisi. Because St. Francis, you see, when he was a young blade, why, he loved his friends and he threw parties for them all the time. And they had he had a lot of money and so he'd throw these parties. But when he would come near a leper, or would see a leper coming or something like that, he'd go away out of his way to avoid even getting near them. Now, any one of you that has ever been near a leper, well, I have seen a few of them over in the Near East, but the incident I'm thinking about is that one time when I was in Istanbul, I was at a place where they knew I was from Chicago. This was in London, excuse me. They knew I was from Chicago. And they said to me one day, say, Harding, here's another fellow from Chicago over here. And I said, really? Why? I'd love to meet him. So they arranged for us to meet. And so I met this fellow, and honestly, I never met anyone with as foul a stench about as that fellow had. Oh, boy, it was terrific. And but here it was my job to be pleasant, see? And to welcome him like a long-lost brother, because when you're over in the other part of the world, why, anybody that comes from your neighborhood back here, why, he's a brother. And but, boy, that was a struggle on my part, because he had the foulest, well, you could smell him 10 feet away. And so, or perhaps I better say I could at any rate. So there was that little test on me. And so was St. Francis. When he would come near a leper, he would go out of his way to avoid him until the thing happened within him. And when that thing happened within him, what else happened? Why, the lepers became the object of his special solicitude. He would care for them as a mother would her babe. He would wash their wounds. He would do the most menial tasks for them. He showered his love upon them. Now, what happened with Frank Laubach? Well, he was over there in the Philippines, and he wasn't getting to first base. And after a year, I believe it was, he was so discouraged and so beaten that he went up on Signal Hill and began to pray. And said, Lord, tell me what's the trouble. Use my own lips to tell me. And then his lips began to talk to him. And his lips said, Frank, you don't love these people. You think you're better than they are. He'd been a missionary for 12 years or something like that. And yet he hadn't learned to love the people. Now, why didn't he love them down there on the southern Philippines? Why, they were dirty. He liked to be clean. They were ignorant. He was educated. They were of another culture, and that's not easy. They were of another color. And apparently that had something to do with it. And they also were hostile. And they were of another religion. So you can you pick out any more reasons why on a human plane he wouldn't be attracted to them? It'd be difficult, wouldn't it? And so something broke within him then. And the tears gushed down his cheeks. And Frank Laubach's ministry began from that moment. He was different then. And he says, this is the reason that I think that maybe color had something to do with it, because he said repeatedly, I became colorblind in that moment. So there are all these things that need to be swept out if we're going to make room for the Spirit. And I wish that we could test ourselves by every one of these things. Now, to test ourselves just by love isn't enough, because we may love up to certain limits, and one of these other things may discover where those limits are. I don't know. I'm going to read these again and see which one you'd like to pick out to test yourself by. And if you're brought up short by one of them, remember, the Spirit's trying to get through there. All right, here we are. Love. And remember, there are no limits to this. As far as human need exists or echoes call, says Charlie Wakely, love, limitless, divine, persists about us all. Its pulsing waters never tell of bounding shore. They rise and roll and surge and swell forevermore. That's the love of God. No limits of any kind, of any kind, of any time, of any place, of any circumstance. Joy. Well, we've already commented on that. Peace. Now, all of us worriers, we better test ourselves by this business of peace. Good temper. If you want to get something done and someone throws a block across it, how do you react? Do you react like a friend of mine who was running, no, not a friend of mine, but I regard him as a friend of mine, although I never met him. This is his story. That he was bumped into by a car on the road. And it was obviously the other man's fault. But he got out of his car and he went over to him, and with a smile on his face, he said, well, this should prove interesting. And a reporter overheard him. And the reporter was struck by that remark. See, there was no anger, there was no flare-up, anything of that sort. So the reporter jotted down the license number, and he kept on thinking about it, and he looked it up and got the man's address, and then he dropped into his office to call on him, and just as he came into the office, the man was getting up to leave, just putting on his hat and getting ready to put on his coat. And so the reporter said, he said, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were leaving right now. And the man said, well, that's all right. He took off his hat and sat down and said, "This should prove interesting." So the reporter said, "Now there it is again." He said, "Now that's the reason that I'm here." He said, "I saw this automobile smash up of yours yesterday or the other day." And he said, "And I heard you get out of the car there and walk up to the fellow and say, 'This should prove interesting.'" And he said, "And that struck me so that I made up my mind I was going to find out about it." He says, "Now, why do you say that? And here I walk into the office and you're getting ready to go out and you sit down and say, 'This should prove it.'" Well, the man laughed. He said, "That has a story." He said, "When I was a youngster, I had a plan one time that I wanted to carry through in the worst possible way. Oh, I was just all burned up to carry that thing through, and something came along and spoiled it. And I was the most disconsolate youngster you ever saw. And yet, a few days later, because that was spoiled, the most wonderful thing happened to me. And my father called me over afterwards, and he said, 'John, do you remember how disappointed you were when that interruption came?' And, 'Yes, Dad.' And now see what happened that never could have happened if you'd gone through with your plan?' Well, I guess you're right. Well, then he said, after this, whenever you're interrupted in anything that you want to do, why, just say, 'Why, this should prove interesting.'" And so he had carried it through. So on that good temper, kindliness, generosity. Now, I want you folks to test yourself on this, because I'm going to talk to you about koinonia later on. And I want you to be generous, see? But generosity, well, it belongs to the Spirit. The Spirit always is an overflowing thing. Doesn't always mean money, but it means generosity. And then fidelity, that steadfastness, that faithfulness, gentleness. And we're like a fellow that takes a key, and starts to unlock a door. And the key sticks. See? I got to have self-control here. But when the key sticks, doesn't work, what do we do then? We begin to work at it harder. Then we begin to kick the door. Then we begin to shake the knob. So forth and so on, see? Don't we? So that's all. In self-control, it ends up with that. Well, now, folks, those are the things. Those are the talismans by which we can test ourselves in every situation this week. And if the Spirit isn't there, what do? We get down and pray and say, "Lord, take this block, whatever it may be, away and give me you." So, dear Lord, we want to make that our prayer this morning as we enter on this adventure of finding and of living with and making room for you and your Spirit. And oh, may the love that comes from you flood our hearts and bring with it all that is of the fruit of your Spirit. We ask this in the name of Him who went all the way through with love and self-giving